employers these days tend to go look at GitHub profiles more than necessarily do your resume, so it's pretty useful to have that stuff in.
No, I think, and that's a great point. I mean, it sounds like there's been a ton of work done, but tying back to the core project, right, the open source project, and getting effective contribution, it sounds like the students is a no-brainer, like connecting with people that are trying to learn this, trying to find work, and like you said, this actually helps them build their resume for potential employers. Speaking practical for a second, what are the types of jobs that people can be considering with this type of knowledge of the Incus project and utilizing this type of technology?
What we've seen in the past is that a lot of the students who contributed to Incus through the University of Texas, those who were still doing open source type work afterwards, tended to be like in the at the fangs, basically. So a lot of Netflix, Google, Nvidia, the like some of the folks we actually had improve our NVIDIA integration in Incus landed on the team doing the NVIDIA container runtime on the NVIDIA side now.
Hey everybody, it's Roger with Kinsta. I'm joined once again by my good friend Stéphane. Hey Stéphane, how are you?
Hey, very good, thank you.
Awesome. Hey, we're live on site. You've got a live feed with some nature this time. Is this real, or is this Google's new image creation technology?
No, it's all real. I'm just on my deck outside because I've got construction going on in the house and in another building, and it's just way too noisy. Because there's no power in the house right now, the lighting upstairs would not really have worked anyways. Ended up going with whatever lighting we've got outside, just hoping it doesn't rain on me because it's getting darker.
All right, well, we'll move quickly. So I want to get to the Incus project. We've got a lot of updates to cover there. But before that, we have some news. Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference happened this last week, and they had an announcement that in the next version of macOS, they're going to be supporting Linux containers. You'll be able to spin up a container with just a simple command. And obviously, I want to hear your thoughts on this because to me, you're the container guy. What do you think? What do you think about Apple's announcement, and what does this mean for developers?
It was kind of a long time coming. I was pretty surprised that Apple didn't move into the WSL game before. Because like Windows has WSL too, which effectively runs a VM with some containers inside it, which makes it pretty easy to run Linux stuff on Windows. On macOS, we didn't really have any of that up until now. Like you could run VMs manually, either through Apple's own framework or through something like Colima or through VMware Fusion, or those kind of options. So you could run a full-fledged VM, but there was no real OS integration with any of that, which to me always felt kind of weird when you consider that Apple themselves, they run Linux on their servers. Like all of the Apple server-side stuff is basically a bunch of Linux, Kubernetes, container stuff everywhere. So their own developer experience within the company must have been pretty crap for a little while now, especially because the servers they have don't run Apple Silicon, they run actual normal AMD and Intel chips. So if you want to do test builds, validation, testing, or anything on their own laptops, you're not on the right architecture anyways. So it makes sense for them to go the route they did, which is basically, you can run containers. And by their definition of containers, it's actually just OCI containers, so it's Docker-style container images. And they're not run as containers, they run as VMs. So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. They effectively are doing the same thing as Kata does on Intel and AMD chips, where every single container is actually running a virtual machine. So they run one virtual machine per container, and then in there they run the container file system and processes. That's fine. That's one approach we can do. We're actually looking at implementing something like that in Incus as an opt-in feature for those who have some kind of legal requirements or the policy requirements that you want absolutely everything isolated in their own VMs. The reason why for us we want to do it opt-in is because the performance is trash. Like the whole point of containers is that it's just a bunch of processes running on the same kernel. That's why containers are nice and fast. That's why you can run them so quickly. That's why you can run thousands of them and your system is not freezing. The moment you start running every single tiny container in its own VM, every single container now has its full kernel, firmware, I/O input-output stuff, IRQs, scheduling, all that stuff is now happening for every single one of those containers. So if you're using it like WSL, where you're only going to have one or two containers, that's fine. If you plan on using that as, hey, I can basically be Kubernetes on my laptop and I'm going to run 3,000 containers, you're not going to have a good day. So that's why like the approach that Colima took with the likes of Docker and Incus actually makes more sense, where they create one big fat VM, then they run Docker or Incus inside that VM and bridge that into macOS, because then if you run 5,000 containers, they're still running as actual containers all in the same VM. So it's kind of different. I understand why they went that way, which was mostly like, hey, this is the safe approach, and most people, we really only want to run a couple of containers to then have a Linux environment they can work in, and off we go. So that's fine in that aspect. I've never, that was also my gripe with Qatar for a long time, was like, I didn't have a problem with the technology, like the super thin VMs being able to run like effectively to some extent a shared kernel binary between multiple VMs that then run what's normally a container file system and processes. I don't have a problem with the technology. We want to implement that in Incus. I've got a problem with calling that a container. Because it's not. It's a virtual machine. It's a virtual machine that's running a OCI image. And that's how we're going to word it in Incus when we add that support. It's going to be, you're going to launch it with --VM. It's going to be clearly marked as a virtual machine running an application. Because that's what it is. It's very cool technology, it's very useful to have it, it's just, it's confusing to people because we're not calling that containers when they're not, and so some of the density, scalability, speed, performance aspect of containers are going to be completely lost to anyone using that, and yeah, it's just kind of terminology. I understand why they did it. As far as the name, it's the same reason why Intel did it with Kata. It's purely marketing. People understand container. They want containers everywhere. And if you're gonna call that a application virtual machine or a thin virtual machine or something like that, people are not gonna understand what it is. The problem is that now they also misunderstand what it is because they think this is a normal container and it's not. Like one example would be with containers, you can easily do things like taking your GPU and sharing it with 20 containers. There's no problem, you don't need special GPU support for that, because you don't need to pass it through a PCI bus like an actual GPU. With those containers they have, you won't be able to do that, because they're virtual machines. You can only pass in full devices through the PCI bus, and like it's running on a laptop, not on a server with virtualization capable hardware. So there's going to be a bunch of limitations, but the general reason for this being they needed an equivalent to WSL but on Macs. That makes sense. That's effectively the same approach Microsoft took, except that on the macOS side it's going to be like that container command and then, you know, pull a full Ubuntu or Debian or whatever container and then run from that. Whereas with WSL, they actually hide the fact that it is a container. In WSL, you pick the Linux you want, so you pick, you know, Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, whatever. There's good selection of them. Yeah, behind the scenes they actually do run inside of a container, but that's mostly hidden away from the user. So it's kind of a different approach on the kind of marketing side and how it's exposed to users.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, Apple and marketing, you know, no surprise there. As far as users who really want a true container experience on their Mac laptop, are they able to spin up, you know, a virtual machine and then bring in Incus, or how would you recommend people who?
Yeah,
really
exactly. So
so
I mentioned the name briefly earlier. There's a project called Colima, whose job it is to literally, like, you can brew install Colima, and then that tool lets you create and manage virtual machines that are meant to be used for containers. So by default, it will effectively run Docker inside that VM and then integrate the Docker CLI on the Mac to interact with Docker inside that VM. So it actually looks like you're running Docker natively, even though you're not. It's actually just going through that VM. And Colima also supports directly interacting with, I think, Containerd and with Incus. So you can run, effectively do Colima, was it like create or new or something like that, then tell it you want Incus, and once that's run, you can do Incus list, launch, all of the normal commands on your Mac, and instead of running on your Mac, which obviously you can't do it natively, it's just being run inside of that VM. Yeah, it's very, like, I actually have a video on YouTube showing that off, and it's very nicely integrated, very good way of doing it. I don't see any real conflict with Apple's approach, so that should still be fine. Like, you can actually, you should be able to mix and match both on the same machine, and that should work just fine.
Excellent. All right. Well, There we go. We got some hot takes going with Apple's new announcement. So switching gears, talking about Incus and the reason that we're really here. New release is out, long changelog, you're saying.
Yeah.
What happened? What's going on?
Yeah, I think it's one of our busiest. It's been our busiest release of the year, but possibly one of our busiest releases, period. And the main reason is still the students. Like the previous release was the first batch of contributions by students. This release is where we've got the bulk of them. And then the next release, we're still going to have a few that are kind of on the trailing end that I'm currently reviewing. So I think we're probably going to have like another 10 or so changes in the next release that are coming from students. But there's also there's one big feature on the list that we've literally been looking at doing for years that finally got done, which is the Windows agent support. So for those running virtual machines on Incus and specifically running Windows in a VM on Incus, now we have the ability to run our agent directly on Windows, which then lets you do Incus exec to directly run commands. So you can do Incus exec name of Windows VM PowerShell, and you get a PowerShell through the Incus API as if you normally would do with like a bash process or something like that. You can also do file transfers through that. You can also get some more details on the OS, like what version is it running, what's the host name, those kind of details. So that's very, very welcome because a lot of Incus users basically never run SSH or RDP or anything in their instances. They just use the Incus API and our agent to get a shell inside of whatever they want. That way, all access control is all done through Incus, so you don't need to have like multiple ways of managing access. And now with that also working on Windows, it's going to be pretty interesting to see what people do with it. It's still pretty early days. Like I effectively got funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund to do the Windows agent port. I implemented that. It works fine, but we're hoping that some folks who are a lot more familiar with Windows are gonna start kicking the tires and help us out, because like we don't have a good install script for it, so you kind of need to attach the CD-ROM drive and run it manually right now. There's some more nicety that can be done to like copy it at the right place, turn it as a service, run it as the right user, that kind of stuff that needs to kind of be integrated. And there are also some other features like Incus. The normal Incus agent supports live adding of drives and shared file systems and that kind of stuff with VMs, which then automatically gets mounted at the right spot. We don't have that for Windows yet. It's possible, like there is a driver on Windows that supports it, but it's not integrated with the agent yet. So if you were hoping to be able to modify your config and say, hey, I want this directory on my Linux system to show up as the D drive in Windows, you're going to have to do it by hand currently. The agent can't do that directly. But we've been able to do it manually, so it's not that difficult to do. It's mostly a matter of we need someone who understands Windows a lot more to go and give some love and tweak the agent so that it works better. So that's kind of that's the main feature. Like I think we've literally had that be requested ever since we added VM support at a time in LXD, so probably like 4 or 5 years ago or something. So it's good to finally have it. And the work that was done should also allow building on other platforms. Like currently we've done Linux and Windows. Adding BSD would be pretty trivial. Adding macOS would be pretty trivial too, except for then you need to figure out how to run macOS inside of a VM on Incus, which is a fair bit harder. Also, Apple in the same WWDC effectively announced that the current macOS release is the last one ever for Intel platforms. Since most people running VMs for macOS run it on Intel or AMD CPUs, we're effectively a year away from that not being a thing anymore. Okay. Limited value in spending a lot of time making that work when it's gonna go away. So Absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of the headline feature.
Well, congratulations. That seems like a really big announcement, and it sounds like any Windows developers out there that are interested in helping out with this, there's definitely some little tweaks that can be finalized.
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's the kind of thing where we're expecting to see quite a bunch of improvements over the next year, basically. Small improvements here and there, tidying things up so that eventually we get to the point where you can attach the CD-ROM agent drive and get the prompt of hey, there's an installer, do you want to install this thing? Kind of go through the motions and get it working nicely very quickly.
Perfect. What else do we have?
Yeah, so other changes, Incus Migrate, which is the tool we use to import, do P2V, V2V type things. That tool has gotten quite a few improvements, so now not only can we import either a system itself or virtual machines or containers running on it into Incus, we can also deal with more complex environments where there's multiple disks. So if you've got multiple disks and you want to show up as multiple disks on a target, we support that now. We also support just importing a disk on its own without the system itself. So if you have a box that has like an extra disk or something like that you want to see within Incus and then attach it to an existing VM in Incus, we can do that now. And those two features combined then made it possible for us to also support importing OVA appliances. So that's pretty standard VM format that usually like appliance builders and like tend to publish their VMs as. So now we've got that and we can just import them into Incus. So there's a bunch of changes to that Incus Migrate tool that are all pretty welcome.
Excellent.
Otherwise, the rest I'm going to try and go pretty quickly through because that was going to take forever. But we've got the initial file API on custom volumes. So if you're creating extra file systems or disks on Incus, you can now directly interact with those. You don't need to attach them to an instance to be able to list files and transfer files into them. You can do it directly now. On the networking side, we've added a couple of knobs to Oven to control the egress address for a VMware container. So if you've got a bunch of public addresses and like one of them will typically be used as the NAT address for the entire network, but now if you need a specific instance within that network to come out with a different address, you can do it through that setting. We can pin MAC addresses on Oven gateways. That's a bit of a niche thing for people running HA environments with fancy redundant routers where they have multiple MAC addresses, but one of them is a virtual MAC that needs to be used for all traffic. Occasionally, Oven was learning the wrong MAC address. Now we have the option to pin it to the correct one that way. We've done a bunch of tweaking to the clock handling on virtual machines, mostly to improve things on Windows. So dealing with the guest giving us like an offset effectively. So that's to handle Windows time zones that are directly flushed to the virtual clock instead of being just kept as an offset in the OS. That's a bit of a difference between Linux and Unix and Windows in that regard. Like on Unix, everything is always stored as UTC, and then the OS knows the offset on top of that. Windows actually flushes the time to the clock with the right time zone applied to it. So that would cause, every time you would reboot your VM, you would be off by 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, depending on where you are in the US, basically, which was not very pleasant. So now we've got a fix for that.
Nice.
Couple of small CLI tweaks to make it easier to get the client certificate and issue client tokens. OCI, so application containers users, we've added a full DHCP implementation now. So if you're on a network with IPv6, that's working correctly, finally. That was a bit of an issue for a bit. Some improvements to rooted NICs and being able to select the exact routing table you want to be on the host system. That's very, very niche, but those who do that kind of thing will be very happy to have it.
Okay.
We changed the way we can do publishing. That's effectively turning an existing container or VM into an image. We've got two different formats within Incus. Up until now, only one format was supported, which was a unified format with a single tarball for the entire thing. Now we can publish as a split, which gets us a tarball for the metadata and then a file for the root disk. That's particularly useful if you want to export something to use it somewhere other than Incus, because now the second disk is basically a normal raw disk image. You can import that anywhere you want. You don't need to start repacking things yourself. Okay. Some improvements to preceding, so that's when you want to configure a server from scratch by providing a configuration file. Those changes were mostly made ahead of Incus OS because we needed a few tweaks so that Incus OS can handle preceding of Incus, and so we've added a few fixes there. We can now configure the list format in the CLI, and that applies to all of the list commands. So that's mostly people who don't like our normal list output, want something more compact. They can now configure it to apply to everything. Still in the CLI, we've got a pretty clear pattern in the CLI that anything you create, you will delete it. Anything you add, you will remove it. And that's basically so that if you create something, there's an expectation that deleting it would potentially cause data loss. Whereas if you add something and you remove it, it's kind of just like a soft relationship. There's no real data involved. So we've got that consistent in the CLI from the beginning. People keep getting confused, keep trying to use the wrong one. So now we've put some aliases in place so that if you try to add instead of create, fine, it will still work. The help messages will still only refer to the correct ones. We still try to build that expectation that, like, if you're gonna use the delete command, you should think about it twice, because that implies that you might lose something forever. Whereas remove, just add it back. There's no real consequence from that. So hopefully people still use the right commands, but if they don't, or in scripts or the like, it's fine. We kind of support both now.
Okay.
And then we've got a couple of changes that are mostly internal, but like all of the list commands, well, most of the list commands now use server-side filtering. So we're doing the filtering on the server side instead of sending the entire list to the client side. The API has been there for a while, but we've had to kind of go command by command to port them over to that. So this time another 5 or 6 commands have been ported. And same thing for our documentation. We've had a bit of an effort for the past year to move to code-generated documentation for the config keys, just so that we stop forgetting to update things. So we've now ported another 5 or 6 things over to that. And again, like most of those changes actually came from students. So like any of those kind of more repetitive type tasks, that was like prime work to give to the students. So they've been doing that. But a bunch of the other features on there, even some of the more complex ones like DHCP v6 for application containers, that came out of those students at the University of Texas. I think this release is probably a good 3/4 of the contributions effectively came from the University of Texas. So
nice.
Very good to see. We still have a bit of a backlog. I mean, anything that was super clean, ready to go has been merged by now. We've got a few more draft, half-baked, needs work type thing that I'm kind of going through progressively. Those take a lot longer because there's often some gaps and I need to actually go and redo some of the work. So I'm trying to get through like a couple of those a week, trying to get rid of the backlog. And after that, we're gonna go through all of the issues that were assigned to students, but where we didn't even see a pull request come in, and effectively ask like, hey, we realize like your class is over. So are you still interested in doing that work? If not, we're just gonna clear the assignment and let someone else do it. And also, did you do any work already? Like, is there anything out there that you just didn't send as a draft PR? Because then please send that over and we'll at least take it from there and still give you the credit, you know. Like all of the PRs that I need to go and look at and tweak and even do significant work on, anything I'm doing from scratch that was not there, I'm gonna have my name on it. But anything that they started doing, even if it needs to be like 3/4 redone, I'll just still give the credit to the student who did it. So it's still good for them to send whatever they have our way, because that's valuable open source contributions. You know, employers these days tend to go look at GitHub profiles more than necessarily do your resume. So it's pretty useful to have that stuff in.
No, I think, and that's a great point. I mean, it sounds like there's been a ton of work done, but tying back to the core project, right? The open source project, and getting effective contribution. It sounds like the students is a no-brainer, like connecting with people that are trying to learn this, trying to find work. And like you said, this actually helps them build their resume for potential employers. Speaking practical for a second, what are the types of jobs that people can be considering with this type of knowledge of the Incus project and utilizing this type of technology?
And what we've seen in the past is that a lot of the students who contributed to Incus through the University of Texas, those who were still doing open source type work afterwards, tended to be like in the at the FANGs basically. So a lot of Netflix, Google, NVIDIA, some of the folks we actually had improve our NVIDIA integration in Incus landed on the team doing the NVIDIA container runtime on the NVIDIA side now. So that's kind of funny to see the same names. I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
Nice.
So that can help a bit. Like obviously, it's not the only thing they look at. I mean, those students are still gonna be new grads. They're still gonna get entry-level jobs. But when you compare, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of resumes that they're going through in some of those, then those who already have experience contributing to virtualization, open source, will be the most likely candidates to get pulled into some of those teams that do open source work at those companies, whereas the rest are more likely to be pulled into very large teams where they effectively get trained for a while longer. So I think it can definitely just get you just ahead of the pack, which is very good to see. I mean, a bunch of students can do that on their own. Like they realize that this is the way to get a better job out of university, and so they will have contributed to open source stuff. They will have started pet projects on GitHub. They will have sent contributions to whether it's Incus, Kubernetes, Linux, QEMU, whatever. They will have found some small things to do in a bunch of those projects, just knowing that that's going to be more than anyone else will have done. So that's going to get you ahead of the pack.
Excellent. No, I think that's great practical advice. As far as other schools who want to interface with, let's say, the Incus project, what are the best ways for them to reach out, and what are some good expectations that they can have for interacting with your project?
Yeah, we've not really seen anyone else reach out yet, but I would like to see the same thing. I mean, I don't really if all the schools in the US start doing that, we're gonna have a problem. But in general, if you're giving, whether it's software engineering classes or in this case it's a virtualization class as a professor, and I mean, first of all, you should have the students look at some of the open source implementations of that, because just textbook what's a hypervisor and building like a basic type 1 hypervisor from scratch. Sure, that's kind of what we expect on a lot of those classes. But it's like all of the most commonly used hypervisors are there, all open source. So you might as well go look at how it's actually done and show some of the complexity and all of the stuff that comes into play when you support, in the case of QEMU and in case of Incus, like we support 8 different architectures. So that's not something you're usually gonna go see in your pet project demo hypervisor, but it's something you can show with the open source ones. And then if you want to go the extra mile and do something similar to University of Texas, where you do group projects extra credit for picking up some easy issues in some of those projects and going through the process of like understanding an issue, preparing a fix, sending it as a pull request, going through the review process. That's very valuable skills. Like I'm not aware of any university right now who's actually running a class on like open source software and contribution, even though it would probably make sense these days. Kind of going over licensing, how does it work with the community, how does it work with there's a bunch of kind of the political side of things, of like, okay, but like what do you do if the project you're using is coming from your competitor? Like, what's the right way of dealing with that? Like, I mean, the right way is you still contribute because you don't want to start creating technical debt. Like, that's a bad idea. But like there's a bunch of that could be taught in universities, where currently it's the kind of thing people only learn when they join a company that actively contributes or uses open source afterwards, and it's like, oh, that's how things actually work.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bunch that could be done to better approach open source in university, and then going all the way to actually contributing. And for us, the way it works, like as much as possible for the project, we'd like when the professors can give us a heads up of like, hey, I'm doing this class, I'm going to try and send a bunch of students your way. Because if we know roughly when a bunch of people might be coming, we're going to prepare a bunch of issues. Like, I don't like having a bug tracker that's got 500 plus issues, because it's impossible for me to keep that in my head and know what actually matters, what doesn't in that mess. So for Incus, we usually try to be like below 50 issues at any one time, and most of them are actual bugs we need to fix or bigger features we're looking at doing right now. We have a lot of small gripes and small things we want to see improved, but it doesn't really make sense for us to open 150 small issues for that kind of stuff. Like, a bunch of them will just fix kind of organically as we do things, we'll just fix them. Some others we just have in the back of our mind of like, oh, well, when things get a bit quiet, we can open a bunch of issues and actually start dealing with that stuff. So when I know a bunch of students are coming, I can usually spend an afternoon and create like 20, 30 small things that people can very easily take and work on. Like, we try to always have maybe 5 to 10 or so of those at any one time. But when we have 30 students showing up all of a sudden, they all want like 2 or 3 things to work on. Yeah, we don't have that ready. So a heads up is very useful.
Okay, and as far as that heads up that looks, they're just sending you an email saying, hey, I'm a professor at such and such, this is what we're planning to do, here's the time frame. Yeah. And then it sounds a lot like a hackathon almost, right? Like,
basically, yeah. I mean, to an extent, like it's usually over the course of a couple of months or something like that on their side, but they usually contribute like 1 day a week or over the weekend or something like that. Like, the contribution time is a bit rough for us. Like, it usually means that I'm gonna have to keep a closer eye on GitHub over the weekends than I normally do, because normally it's mostly professional, so the weekend is very quiet. But then with students, they're busy during the week and they try to do homework and stuff during the weekend, so we see more activity during that time.
Okay.
But yeah, like having an idea of like how much time do they have, how big projects are they looking for. Because sometimes we've had the opposite issue of like, oh no, this is too simple. Like, this is literally like few tweaks in the CLI. They're not going to really learn much that way. It's like, okay. So then we want some slightly more complex things for them to look at.
Yeah.
Once we start having a bunch of them, we're probably going to have to put quotas to an extent, being like, hey, look, I'm dealing with, 5, 6, 7 colleges all at the same time. That's not going to work. We only have so much time on our side, only so many issues we can open. So you each get like 10, 15 issues or something. Well, we're not there yet. It would be nice to be at that point. It would be nice to get a lot more. And also, there are a lot more open source projects out there. This particular class is really about virtualization, so that limits the pool of projects you can contribute to, for sure.
Absolutely.
But if it's a more generic software engineering type class, then any open source project becomes a viable option. I think there are a lot of projects that could do with the extra hand. I know that projects like Home Assistant have been doing kind of the same thing, where like they've got a month a year where they keep track of all of, like basically nothing is too small to file an issue type thing, so they're just like getting a whack ton of very small things and just doing polishing, because that's what we often don't have time to do, and that makes a massive difference to the users. Okay. So having those kind of contributions show up and help with, polishing those small issues that people keep reporting, but it's not really, nobody really has time because we've got actual bugs we need to take care of. It's great that we can have some resources to do that.
Yeah, no, I love the practical aspect to this as well, right? Because not only are they learning the technology, but they're learning how to work with other people in GitHub, in these actual projects. And when they go to work, like that's immediately transferable and I'm sure immediately appreciated by the employer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why for me, when they're like, oh, this issue is like too simple, I'm like, it's not really the point. I mean, the point is, like, pick an issue, work through it, send a pull request, get feedback, fix things, do that back and forth, like, learn how to contribute. Because, like, some of it, too, is, like, I will get direct emails, and we'll have to be like, no, GitHub, please. Like, like, there are other people looking. There's, even if not now, maybe a few years from now, people will potentially be Googling things and be like, oh, okay, this is how it was done, that's how it was done, why it was done. And that's why you want all of that to be in the open. That's the main difference between open source and traditional software, where like traditional software is all done in-house or through contractors, and there's like usually very poor documentation. People leave the company with that knowledge. You end up with, okay, well, I've got a piece of code here, I have no idea why it was written that way, and nobody can tell me. We're trying to avoid that as much as possible with open source, because it might be painful. You might need to go through a 150 messages mailing thread or something to figure out why something was done that way. But in general, you can. The information is there.
I think that's awesome. I love it. Stéphane, thank you so much for your time. We're expanding the length of these shows, and I think it's worth it, like learning so much. And from, I can speak from the WordPress project, we've got this Campus Connect initiative going where we're actively trying to get the youth into WordPress. And I think your project is a good model of how we might want to interface with these projects and really help the students also realize, hey, when you get into the workforce, it's not all going to be sexy work. Like, in fact, when you start, you're going to get the simplest junk stuff, and you just need to learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, if you think of the WordPress ecosystem, you've got a lot of plugins and themes and all that kind of stuff that might be stuck on older PHP features. They might be stuck on a whole bunch of different things. Like, from what I recall, there's no like kind of central bug tracking on any of that kind of stuff, which is a bit unfortunate. But if there was a good way for all of those individual plugins and themes and the like to list a bunch of easy issues for newcomers, and you could aggregate that somewhere centrally, it would be like, hey, yeah, you want to make the WordPress ecosystem better? There you go. That's a whole bunch of issues. Maybe you can even sort those based on number of downloads on the given application, like given plugin or theme, to get a better impact. Like, maybe don't fix all 50 bugs on something that's got 3 installations. Maybe go and fix something in something that's got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of installs. That could be very useful. And yeah, like that's again, like, it doesn't really matter what the programming language is, what the project is. It's really like learning how to work in the open, learning how to deal with that kind of those kind of projects, and like everything that comes with it. Like, some of it is gonna be like, how do you deal with a grumpy maintainer? Like, we try not to be that on the Incus side, but if you expose people to like a whole bunch of different projects, yeah, some of that will happen. Like, you're gonna have someone who's gonna be a bit short on patience. It's like, it's not great. You also learn. I think that's part of the reason why the University of Texas kind of sends everyone our way. Okay. Is because they did send folks to other projects too, which might not necessarily have had a bad experience with the maintainers or anything there, but it might have moved way too slow for it to be viable. Like, they only have a semester at most to do things. every time you ask a question, it takes 2 weeks to get an answer. That's not gonna work. So you need to work on like more kind of reactive projects, like looking at projects that actively merged things over the past few days that have people actively answering questions in their issue tracker. And that's a good one to pick for those kind of first contributions.
Excellent.
And for us, like a lot of that actually also goes back to Hacktoberfest back then, right? Like it's still run every year, but these days you don't even get a t-shirt. So I think a lot of people are getting less interested in contributing. Yeah, don't underestimate the value of swag, really. Like when DigitalOcean was actually sending t-shirts to everyone for Hacktoberfest, we were getting a lot of people in October trying to take some easy issues from us.
Okay.
The past couple of years, they've been like planting a tree, I think, basically. And we've gotten extremely few contributions, which is unfortunate. But it's the same kind of issues we were using for Hacktoberfest that we use for those students. It's the same kind of ideas. Like projects really need to have a pool of new contributor type issues that are very well understood, that you can mentor on, that you basically know in your head how you're going to do everything already. So it's very easy to give pointers like, here, look at this file, look at that file, I kind of want this structure, I kind of want things to look that way. Because there's nothing worse than like a new contributor starting to work on something, and then they go down the rabbit hole of having to refactor half the code base, and there's like a whole bunch of issues that like behind this thing. And that's fine for people who are paid to work on the code base. Like we're used to having to deal with that. Like you start a task that's supposed to be a one-day thing, and like 3 weeks in, you're still working on the thing. That happens. We just try to avoid that as being the first experience contributing to a new project.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. As far as moving forward, I know Incus OS is on the horizon. What are the other big things that you're kind of getting excited about?
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing a bunch of networking work around Oven in Incus, so like some of the more complex networking, like being able to tunnel between multiple Incus clusters, that kind of stuff. And yeah, there was a bunch of things that are driven by Incus OS, because we're like I've got machines running it. We're currently dealing with some of the stake your boot signing, all that kind of stuff to get the image distribution and signing to be solid. So anyone who actually deploys it from that point on can be confident they will get updates and they don't need to wipe the machine and redeploy. So that's kind of the main focus there. But we also want, currently in Incus OS, our goal is for large enterprise deployments. That's the main reason we need it right now, is we've got customers who want to deploy over 2,000 servers and they don't want to deal with installing Ubuntu on 2,000 servers and then manually installing Incus and managing that whole mess. So that's our main focus. But the other side of it is we want it to be the best solution for home labs as well.
Okay.
Where we want to be able to install Incus OS on like 3 machines, go on the first one, get a web UI, say, hey, I want to set up a cluster, join the other 2 machines, and off you go. So there's a bunch of work we're doing in Incus itself to make that possible. Effectively making it easy to do like auto discovery, stretch network, that kind of stuff, so that we can easily run the services we need to make a solid cluster without the users really needing to think about any of that. They will just get like Incus running on the multiple machines, they'll get all of the nice features for clustering all out of the box, and like a nice update story so they can focus on running stuff on top of us and not just running, like maintaining Incus. Like the hobby should be running interesting services on top of Incus, not maintaining Incus.
It's the same thing I tell people about Kinsta managing your WordPress, right? We want you to focus on WordPress. We'll handle all the other stuff. So that sounds fantastic. Stéphane, I want to wrap things up because we're way over your time. I know you got stuff you need to get back to. As always, if people want to reach out to you or the project, what are the best ways to do that?
Yeah, so we've got our community forum. That's always a good way to chat with other Incus users. Otherwise, for any issue or anything, we're on GitHub, and I've got a YouTube channel at Dosably, which is my my own company, which has all of the YouTube videos. Typically, the monthly releases get a YouTube video going over all of the new features, and then I do, when I can, I do a weekly live stream, usually working on Incus OS, with actually the next one I'm starting in an hour and a bit.
Okay, excellent. Stéphane, I always appreciate your time. It's always great to see you and talk to you. I hope the construction's going well, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
All right, yeah. Thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.